May this light transform our lives, reminding us of how much we are loved, inspiring us to serve the world, and welcoming us to this circle of faith. And those chalice lighting words are words that I wrote to use with our children on Sundays when we had a sort of a in-person children's chapel or social action project where they were all together, and they're based on the church's mission. So, transformation, love, service, and welcoming faith. So I'll begin. I'm Star Sarahs-Borchelt. I'm your Director of Lifespan Faith Development. And I came to MLUC because I have been a professional UU religious educator since 1998. And I really loved the congregation that I was at before MLUC, but I was ready to work full time and be responsible for adult programming as well as children's programming. And that congregation wasn't in a position to be able to offer that to me. So I looked around and saw what else I could find. My family is myself, my husband, we also got married in 1998, and our 4 kids. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my family's faith journey to get into our topic for the day. And I am actually a 3rd-generation Unitarian Universalist, which is relatively unusual. Many more people who are Unitarian Universalists and members of MLUC are people who came out of another religious tradition or who did not have a religious home before they came to MLUC or to Unitarian Universalism. However, in my family, all 5 of my grandparents became Unitarians in the late 1940s and the early 1950s. That was a boom time for all kinds of houses of worship. There was a baby boom, and World War II had just ended, and there was a lot of effort being put into building community. And mainstream churches, including Unitarian churches and Universalist churches, set up a separation between worship, which was for adults, and church school, which was for children, for the most part. There were lots of volunteers to staff those church schools. Most upper middle class families were able to be single income families. Lots of kids because of the baby boom. There was a lot of creativity and innovation in what we did with families and children in churches, but most of the curricula for children and adults was essentially secular on purpose because they wanted it to be used in wider cultural settings. And so a whole generation of UUs, my parents' generation, grew up with little to no faith development. And I'm going to talk more about what I mean by that in a few minutes. In my case, my parents, I have my 2 parents and 5 uncles. And of those 7 people who were all raised in Unitarian churches, only 2 of them have ever joined a church as an adult. And only one of them has ever actually participated on a regular basis at church as an adult. But I think all of them, if you ask them to fill out a form and it was supposed to have a religion on it, would put Unitarian Universalist on the form. But there wasn't a very deep connection. So in my case, my grandparents took me to church as a child. I think it was sort of a, let's give my parents a break for the morning. That the grandparents would like to have the kids at church with them kind of thing. And by the time that I was being brought up, what you did with kids, and I am talking about adults too, but I think the progression of what I'm talking about is a little bit clearer when you look at what the children's programming was. So the classes that I went to when I was a kid were called religious education classes. So it was church school and then it was religious education. And some things that sort of changed in there were that during my early childhood, the Unitarian Universalist principles, which you may have seen in various places, were adopted, and they were included in curriculum for both children and adults. The programming in bigger UU churches during that time period There was very much an emphasis on we'll have a first grade class and a second grade class and a third grade class. It was very age segregated. My actual experience growing up was not like that because I grew up in a very small church. So sometimes we had enough kids to have a religious education class and sometimes we didn't. And when we didn't, I still went to church. I just helped my grandma decorate the altar. I sang in the choir with my grandpa. I helped in the nursery with my grandma. So I was very integrated into the life of the congregation in a way that a lot of people my age, if they grew up UU, were not, because they were shunted off into these classes that really had very little to do with the rest of the church, except that you would get to know your teachers who were volunteers from the congregation. I became a director of religious education. That was my job title in the late 90s. And when I started, the emphasis was really on learning about our faith as Unitarian Universalists and learning about other faiths. So those were the two things that we were focused on. So here at MLUC, my job is to organize and support programming that provides what we now call faith development for children, youth, and adults of all ages. Why am I calling what I do faith development instead of church, school, or religious education? Words are complicated and they can mean different things to different people at different times. When I hear church school or Sunday school, I think of something very regimented where there's a teacher imparting knowledge to students. I think of a top-down, instruction-based, regimented kind of pedagogy. When I hear religious education, I think of something that's more relational, but it's still about giving something I have to people who don't have it. When I hear faith development, I think of something that's experiential. I think of something that people at many different stages and phases of life are doing together. So up on the screen is an amazing graphic, which is the work of Joy Berry. She was your director of religious education here at MLUC about probably 5 years ago now. And now she's working for the FOS Collaborative at Meadville Lombard Seminary in Chicago. But I love this graphic that she did, and I want to talk through it a little bit to help you understand some of what's important to me about the term faith development. So there's a big loaded word up there at the top, which is faith. And people have a lot of different definitions of faith, a lot of different understandings of it. So when I say faith in faith development, I mean two things. One of them is that Unitarian Universalism is a faith which is a historical, inheritable religious tradition with deep historical roots, which we can pass on to our children and our grandchildren. I know that because that's what happened for me. I know it's possible. The other thing that I mean is that I or we can have faith in something larger than myself or ourselves, which can support me or us and carry me or us through times of great personal or communal need. And that thing, that something that's larger than me or you or us, doesn't need to be defined with great precision in order for this conversation to work. And there are probably as many different definitions of what that larger thing might be as there are Unitarian Universalists, or possibly more. Like that's one of our UU jokes, is that if you ask 5 UUs for a definition of God, you'll get at least 7 answers. But it doesn't have to be defined as God either. It's just that there's something bigger than us. There are a lot of different theories about how faith develops over time and with experience in human beings. James Fowler was one of the preeminent thinkers in this field, and the remaining big words on this graphic are based on his work. Caught, taught, bought, sought, and wrought. So we have faith development classes for our very young children because faith is caught. We want our little kids to catch our values, traditions, and beliefs. They will do this no matter what, but we create formal opportunities for this to happen and to support families in helping this happen. This year, we do not have any Zoom classes for children who are younger than kindergarten because our families told us very clearly that there's so much Zoom time, so much online schooling that they didn't want to sign their kids up for very young kids for more time on a screen. So instead, we're actually offering a group for parents of very young children to help them do the work of helping their kids catch our faith at home and to provide some support, to be honest. If you grew up in a different faith or even in no faith tradition, there are ideas that you caught as a child in your church or your synagogue or your mosque or your temple, or just in your family and your community that you may still value or you may want to set aside. We offer adult religious education classes or faith development classes to support your examination of those ideas you're carrying around with you and whether those ideas are still right for you or need some adaptation or need to be let go of, based on what you decide, not on what we decide. We're not here to tell you what the right beliefs for you to carry with you are. You'll also catch on to the history and heritage and identity of being a Unitarian Universalist and an MLUCer through participating in other parts of the congregation that you're going to hear more about in other contexts. Although these things aren't a formal part of the faith development curriculum, things like circle suppers, which we can't do right now, but we will be able to again eventually, small group ministry, which is happening all online, social action projects, enjoying music, all are super important parts of feeling like you belong here. So we have faith development classes for our elementary age children because faith is taught. We want to teach our bigger kids to think about choices, to know how we do things as opposed to how other people do things, and about the many, many options of what human beings find it meaningful to believe and what we find it meaningful to believe. We are offering online classes once a month for kids ages 5 or 6 and up. We offer adult programs and classes that teach these same lessons both explicitly and implicitly. And we invite adults who are still relatively new to our congregation to teach our children's classes sometimes because there is no better way to learn a subject than by teaching it. I see teaching children's faith development classes as an opportunity for parents and other adults to explore all the topics and stories and ideas with the kids so that everyone involved learns and grows. We have faith development classes for our young adolescent children because we want to help them buy into it. Part of that process is questioning everything we've taught them, testing it against what their hearts and spirits tell them, and our classes offer a supportive and challenging space for that to happen. Faith is bought. And that's actually, I think, several of us in this particular class have kids in our coming of age program this year. And this is, we are asking, when we do coming of age, we are asking our kids to buy into this. We are asking them to think through what they think and say, yes, actually, I do identify as Unitarian Universalist, or not, but we're asking them to buy into the idea that this faith is important. We encourage adults who feel called to do so to enter into leadership in the congregation and in the faith development program. So that's adult buying into it. If there's a class you wish we offered for adults that you think you could lead, talk to me. We can explore making that happen. You could be a person who helps others within our congregation test what they believe and explore how their hearts and minds might expand. So next we have faith development classes for our older adolescent children because we know they are embarking on a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We want to support that seeking. Faith is sought. We connect with movements and ideas beyond our own church and our own concerns so that adults too can search for truth and meaning in the broader world. We regularly bring in outside speakers to stimulate our thoughts and inspire our hearts to act. And we also send delegates to UUA trainings and workshops and assemblies. Oftentimes, Unitarian Universalists get stuck here in the fourth stage, the sought phase stage of Fowler's faith development paradigm. We really like, many UUs really like being the hero who's seeking and questioning and discovering. But there is another stage of faith development. That's a faith that is wrought. And a person whose faith is wrought is a person whose faith is created over time and through interaction with different people and ideas. A person whose faith is wrought uses their faith as a foundation to support them. A person whose faith is wrought is willing to change and be changed by experience and experimentation. A person whose faith is wrought works on it. And hopefully that work is what we make possible through our programs and events and classes. I think it's important to mention that it's not like babies start out at the caught stage and then grown-ups are at the sought or wrought stage and you can't go loop back through these stages. Everybody loops through these stages multiple times in their life. When they are in a new community, when you're in a new community, you're going to do more catching on up to what's going on, and you're going to need to learn from some teaching, and you're going to need to buy in, even if you are a very mature and faithful person who has been working on your faith for a long time, because it's not an individual process. It is individuals working together in community, interrelating, um, and the community interrelating with the world outside of the community as well.